This is the Global Wealth Show with Grant Connis and Andrew Costa.
At a young age, people very close to me were really hurt by the financial markets, and that drove me to be in this industry.
The vision was to change the industry.
Everybody calls this your nest egg, and I think of it as so much more than that. This is your life savings.
So being that guide, that coach for our clients is why we do what we do.
What we do could change someone's life.
The Global Wealth Show begins now.
Hi, I'm Megan Mozak, and welcome to the Global Wealth Show, the show that helps you plan for the retirement you want. There are so many things in life that we simply can't control. Grant and Andrew are here today to discuss the things you can control in retirement. Also, do you know how much risk exists inside your retirement plan? Well, coming up during today's Global Perspective, Andrew shows you how to find out. And later, we'll try to get some answers to your biggest retirement questions during Ask Global Wealth. Joining me again, Grant Connis and Andrew Costa, the founders of Global Wealth Management right here in South Florida. Grant, Andrew, great to be with you again.
Good to see you, Megan. Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of things we just can't control as we're planning for retirement. This really gets intimidating for a lot of people. So they get paralyzed, they end up doing nothing, and boy, Grant, Andrew, that's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It can be a recipe for disaster. And you know, we all know that there's these things that we need to do, but it's paralyzing. And so it becomes very tough. And there's a few main things that we should all look at and think about to make sure that we make the right decisions going forward.
And I think the first thing, Megan, is really understanding and get a grasp around what you're truly paying in cost. You know, not only the disclosed fees, which you might know you're paying the advisor, let's call it 1%, but more importantly, the undisclosed fees, the hidden costs. You know, there are a lot of investments out there that kind of the fees are permitted to fly under the radar. And people think they're paying one thing, and a lot of times they're paying something totally different. You know, I was on a cruise last summer with my family. We did an Alaska cruise, and we're going through these passages and these glaciers coming down into the water. And I was on the back of the ship with my son. He was 8 years old at the time. And he was asking me about, you know, the icebergs that were floating around in the water. And he said, you know, what are those things, Daddy, that are floating around the water? And I said, you know, those are icebergs. And we started to have that conversation of when you look at an iceberg, you know it's above the water because you can see it, but you have no clue what's beneath the water. It could be 2, 3, 4, 5 times on what's above the water. Well, the same thing relates back to the financial world and your investments. You know, what's above the water might be the advisor fee, maybe 1%, 0.5%, 1.5%, whatever that might be. What's beneath the water is the investment cost, maybe another 2, 3, or 4%. So when you're looking at your investments, you can't just look at the tip of the iceberg. You got to look at the big picture because that's what you're really paying. And the more money that you can put in your pocket than that perhaps of the investment company's pocket, typically you come out further ahead in the end.
Yeah, costs and fees are such a big deal in this industry that we created what we call our cost analyzer to understand, let people understand really what it is that's underneath the water. What is it that the rest of the iceberg has for us? And so Greg actually came into the office a few weeks back and he had heard us talking about costs. And Greg was a retired electrician, had done a really nice job saving throughout his life, had saved up about $500,000. And this was everything to him. And this was his whole life savings. And you know, he said, you know, I just want to know if what I'm paying, I think I'm paying about 1% to my advisor, about $5,000 a year, somewhat of a reasonable amount of money. But he said, I just want to make sure there's nothing else. And so we did this cost analysis. And what we realized is there was a lot beneath the water. There was a lot of these undisclosed fees and product costs and all this extra stuff. And so in total, he wasn't paying 1%, he was paying 4% per year, which on $500,000, that's $20,000 a year. I mean, over the next 10 years of his life, that's $200,000 in fees, almost half of what he had saved that was just being eaten up in fees. I mean, what does that money mean to Greg? I mean, that's years of savings, that's trips, that's you know, ability to take the grandkids out and go, you know, do new things and, you know, just all of that stuff. So he was able to fortunately catch this at a time where he could correct it and kind of get rid of a lot of that stuff. And it all starts with understanding what it is that you're paying on your investments and taking advantage of that cost analysis.
And Megan, here's why it's important. Since 2009, we've had a great run in the market. When you're up 10% a year or 15 or 20% a year and you're making those type of returns, fees kind of become secondary. You don't really think about them. But the problem is those fees are there in good times and bad times. So the market's flat or the market's down and you're paying 2 or 3 or 4% a year in fees, that's where it really starts to eat in at your investment returns and your portfolio over time. So you really got to do it, your homework on that. You need to get a second opinion done and really understand what you're truly paying, because it can have a significant impact on your bottom line.
What you're paying, you got to understand it. You've got to know it. Thank you so much, Grant and Andrew. And coming up next, more strategies to get a handle on what you can control in retirement. And later on, during the Global Perspective, just how much risk are you taking with your retirement assets? And then we'll try to get answers to some of your biggest retirement questions during the Ask Global Wealth segment. But first, here's how you can contact Grant, Andrew, and the team at Global Wealth Management.
You're watching The Global Wealth Show with Grant Connis and Andrew Costa.
Welcome back to the Global Wealth Show. I'm here with Grant Connis and Andrew Costa from Global Wealth Management. Today, we're talking about the things you can control during retirement, the strategies that could help your money go a lot further in retirement. Grant and Andrew, there's no doubt we've got a lot of things out of our control when we're thinking about retirement planning. How do we gain some of that control back?
Well, Megan, there are a lot of things out of our control, but there's a lot of things that you can control, and one of them is Social Security. Social Security is a big part of all of our income in retirement. It's kind of the pillar of where you're going to be able to pay for your fixed expenses, and the things that you can control with Social Security are, number one, when are you going to take it? And a lot of people think just take it at 62. That is not necessarily the case. You really need to have a Social Security plan in place, and a plan around the taxes in your Social Security. Up to 85% of your Social Security benefit can be subject to tax, which can be devastating if you look at that as a lifetime benefit. I mean, that could be the difference in literally $50, $60, $100,000 or more over your lifetime. So it's a big deal, and it's something that we do a lot of planning around when you come into the office. The other thing that you can definitely control is taxes in retirement. Taxes are actually one of your biggest expenses in retirement, and there's a lot of strategies and a lot of planning that you can do around that to make sure that you get that under control.
And I think another thing too, Megan, is controlling market volatility and the risk in your portfolio. A lot of people think that you can't control that market volatility. In reality, you can. And what it all really starts with is proper asset diversification and also diversification of your income sources in retirement. And what I mean by that is, when you're in retirement and you're taking income, whether it's a required minimum distribution or you just need income from your portfolio because you no longer have a paycheck coming in, you need to make sure that you're taking income from different sources, whether that be from a bond or a stock or an annuity or whatever that type of investment is. And we're seeing it a lot today with bonds. People that have taken out bonds maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and they were getting a good income stream, and now those bonds are being called because interest rates have come down so much. And they're having a hard time finding suitable places to generate or replace that income. But having a proper income diversification strategy will allow you to protect against that. Going back to asset diversification, a lot of times when people come into our office for our retirement roadmap review, which is our second opinion services where we kind of lay out the foundation and help people build their retirement plans, we focus on what we call the 3 worlds of money. And what the 3 worlds of money is the market world of money, which would be like your stocks and your bonds and your annuities and your ETF, investments that are tied to the stock and bond market. And then you're going to have that protection piece, which would be like CDs, bank accounts, money markets, fixed annuities, investments in which you cannot lose your principal. You can't make a whole lot of money, obviously, but you can't lose anything. So making sure that you're allocated properly there is absolutely essential. And what we find a lot of times is when people do come into the office for this retirement roadmap review, we find that maybe they're in a 60-40 portfolio, like 60% equity or 40% fixed income or vice versa. Well, that's only one world of money. That's the market world of money. So making sure that they're allocated properly into those 3 different sectors really gives them a lot more confidence, a lot more clarity to their plan to make sure they're not overweight and subject to major market swings as it relates to their investment portfolio.
Yeah, we have a dear client, Jim, who retired doctor, and talk about diversification and how huge it was or impactful it was for his life. He was in 2007. He was literally a couple of months from being retired, and he wasn't diversified. He was in just that one world of money. He was in kind of your stock and bond allocation, your large cap, your small cap, your international. I mean, he felt like he was diversified, but he forgot about the other two worlds of money. And as we all know, 2008 hit, and Jim lost over $300,000 in 2008. And it was amazing to hear him talk about it, because he said, I had to end up working another 10 years. He worked until 2016, totally changed his life and his thoughts about retirement. It's a big deal. Diversification is huge. It's the pillar, it's the foundation of your retirement plan.
Getting back some of that control, so important. Grant and Andrew, thank you. Well, coming up next in Global Perspective, do you know how much risk you're taking with your retirement assets? Andrew will share with you how to find out. But first, here's how you can contact Grant and Andrew and the team at Global Wealth Management.
You're watching The Global Wealth Show with Grant Connis and Andrew Costa.
Welcome back to the Global Wealth Show. In today's Global Perspectives, Andrew shares with us some of the biggest pitfalls to retirement income planning.
In today's Global Perspective, what I want to talk to you a little bit about is something called our risk analysis. What we notice at Global Wealth Management is that a lot of you are heading right into retirement, taking on way more risks than you actually want to be taking, and way more risks than you actually think that you're taking. And so the first step of what's called our retirement roadmap review is called our risk analysis. And in this risk analysis, we're able to show you how much your portfolio could make in a good market, but more important than that, how much could your portfolio go down in a bad market if the market were to tumble in a 2008 or a 2002 type market. And so Bob and Sandy came into the office a couple of weeks ago, and they had heard our show about this risk and understanding the risk of your portfolio. And it was really neat sitting down with Bob and Sandy. They had done a great job during their accumulation phase of their life. They were retired teachers from New Jersey, and they had had a very modest salary throughout their lives, but they had done a great job saving and investing with growth and taking on a little bit more risk. And they had saved about $500,000 in total assets. And they had always said, in the beginning, when they first started working, that was a goal that they had always set out to, and they felt if we could get there, we could definitely retire. And so it was neat hearing about all that. And they had recently retired down here from New Jersey. They had bought themselves a condo on the beach, another goal that they had always set out for. And they said, everything's set. We're retired, recently retired, but we realize that we have no idea how much risk is inside of our portfolio. We've been with our advisor for 4 or 5 years, and our advisor's done a pretty good job for us, but we just have no idea how much risk is inside of our portfolio. And so the first question I asked Bob and Sandy was, how much risk are you actually willing to take? Not conservative, not moderate, not aggressive, but how much actual risk are you willing to take? And both Bob and Sandy said, if our portfolio goes down any more than 5%, about $25,000, we're not sleeping at night. We're not getting along, we're not sleeping at night. It's just too stressful for us. And so I said, great, well, let's go through our risk analysis. Let's understand where you sit right now. And so Bob and Sandy had stocks and bonds and mutual funds and variable annuities and all kinds of things inside of their portfolio. So our staff of planners put all of that through this risk profile. And what it told us is how much they could make in a good market, but more importantly, how much could they lose in a bad market. So as you can see here on the screen, in a good market, Bob and Sandy, they had, as I said, about $540,000 saved. And in a good market, they had the ability to make up to 39% or $211,000, which is great. I mean, who wouldn't want to experience that in a great market, especially in retirement? But as you can see, Bob and Sandy had the ability in a bad market, a real tough market, to lose about 34%, which was $184,000. I mean, just think of how long it took Bob and Sandy to save $184,000. And so I asked Bob and Sandy, is that comfortable for you? Can you stomach that if that were to happen to you? And both of them said, absolutely not. Bob actually said to me, I'm not going back to work, Andrew. And so we started to craft a plan with Bob and Sandy on how we were going to get them within their comfort zone, that 5% downside threshold. more in line with this green and the blue here. So as you can see, understanding the risk inside of your portfolio is one of the most important things that we think that you can do heading into retirement. And it's why it's the first step in our retirement roadmap review. What it does is it gives you the confidence and clarity going forward in retirement, knowing that no matter what kind of market you're faced with, you will never fall outside of your comfort zone. So do you know where you stand from a risk standpoint?
Coming up next on the Global Wealth Show, Grant and Andrew answer questions from viewers just like you. We'll be right back.
You're watching The Global Wealth Show with Grant Connis and Andrew Costa.
I'm Megan Mozak, and now it's time to hear from you in this week's Ask Global Wealth segment. So Grant, Andrew, you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first question comes from Pete in Weston. He says, I'm confident that my wife and I are going to be fine financially as long as I'm alive because of my pension. But Pete says he's concerned about his wife when he's gone.
Well, that's a great question, Pete, and it's something that we see a lot in our practice. And when it comes to pensions, you really got to do your homework as it relates to what your options are. So if you have not taken the pension, typically you're going to have about 3 or 4 different options as it relates to how you're going to take those pension payments. You're going to have, a single life option where it's going to, pay you out on a monthly basis until you pass away. Unfortunately, if you take that option, there's nothing left for your spouse. The second option or second and third option would typically be a survivor option that might say 100% of the payout would go to your spouse. So if something happens to you, she'll continue those payments uninterrupted. Or maybe it's like a 50% payout, something like that, where she would get half of what you were receiving over time. And then the final option would be more of like a lump sum option. And that would be, just taking that lump sum, kind of foregoing that monthly option. Well, what tends to happen a lot of times is people get attracted to that higher monthly dollar amount. And it's higher on the single life option because they're just paying for one life. And so that might be a couple $100, maybe even $1,000 more a month. So people a lot of times get enticed to that. Whereas if you do your homework properly, that lump sum option can generate perhaps even more income for you than the single life option if you set it up the right way. So I definitely would recommend doing your homework and really trying to find the best particular strategy for you in your particular situation.
Yeah, and I would just say, Pete, if you've already taken the pension, there's still some options available. You're a little bit more limited, but one option would be just start siphoning off a certain amount of money per month and maybe buy yourself a life insurance policy on your life. That way, if and when you do pass away and the pension stops, your surviving spouse, your wife has this life insurance benefit that she can create income from and take income from. So that would be one way of doing it. If for some reason Pete's not insurable, then that option kind of goes away. But there's still some other options available. You can look at some of your other assets and start putting some planning together around that. Maybe you have a certain portion of your assets that are set up to grow and not really tapped for income during your retirement years, so that when that pension does stop, you have that bucket of money for your wife to utilize.
And we ran into a similar situation with Tom and Joan recently. Came into the Coral Springs office, and they did just that. I mean, he had taken the single life payout, and his main concern when he came in was to make sure that Joan would continue that income, even though his income would stop. So we had to do some income gap planning and make sure that we had some additional assets kind of siphoned off to the side to generate that income if something were to happen to him.
Let's head out to Lauderdale by the Sea, where we find JD, and he says, I have an annuity that I received as an inheritance from my mom. What should I do with this? And the insurance agent that my mom bought the annuity from is no longer in business.
Well, that's a great question, JD, and again, that's something that we see quite a bit in our practice as well. And the first thing I would recommend doing is aligning yourself and consulting with a fiduciary advisor, an advisor that is really going to be working in your best interest and give you honest, candid feedback as it relates to that particular investment and whether or not it's in your best interest to keep it, or if there's something else that you can be doing to kind of improve upon your situation. But once you secure that type of advisor, then the next thing you would want to do is you'd want to do what we call an annuity analyzer. It's something that we do in our practice as part of our retirement roadmap review, and it's really a full second opinion, in-depth analysis on the annuity, particularly to the fees and the features, and really just diving into it to make sure that if it's indeed right for you, if there's something better you can be doing around that. So those would be the first recommendations I would do as it relates to that particular annuity, and just really making sure that it's, you know, the best thing to keep it, or if there's something better you can be doing around that.
Yeah, I think the big thing for JD is that when you have that fiduciary advisor, they're going to be looking at your whole situation, and you know, maybe they find out that given, you know, what JD's doing, there's you know, really not a need to have this annuity. It was maybe great for his mother, but or his family member, but you know, it might not be the right thing for him. So it really just kind of depends. What we see a lot of in these variable annuities, if that's the type that it is they can be riddled with fees and costs. So maybe there's a lower cost option that you can utilize and have a better outcome from. So it just kind of depends, but there's definitely some options out there.
Working with the right advisor makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
It does.
Grant, Andrew, thank you so much. Well, if you have a question, you can visit AskGlobalWealth.com or call the number on your screen. We might use your question in an upcoming show. Remember, what you've just heard today is information, unless you take action. So why wait? Call now. We hope to see you next time. For Grant Connis, Andrew Costa, and the team at Global Wealth Management, I'm Megan Mozak, hoping you have a great day and an even better retirement.